I'm a great believer that artists should never apologize for their art. People are offended, that's their problem. It's not yours. You've done your bit.
For over 40 years, Rowan Atkinson, popularly known as Mr. Bean, was a favorite of the woke mob, right up until he opened his mouth. As it turned out, the usually silent actor has a lot to say about cancel culture and wokeness, and this has driven half his fan base crazy. Now, the woke mob is pressuring him to go back to playing the silent fool. However, putting his career on the line, Rowan is doubling down on his stance against woke culture. Even those unfamiliar with his name are at least familiar with his face. Rowan Atkinson, who has been acting for about 45 years now, made his fortune through comedy, with shows and movies like Mr. Bean, Blackadder, and Johnny English under his belt. Rowan Atkinson has today become a worldwide household name. However, he first came to prominence during a very different era of comedy. As someone who started acting in 1978, the media landscape was way different back then than it is today. For one, woke culture was not really a thing. As such, all upcoming comedians had several avenues to which to apply their talents. No jokes or gags were considered too far. Rowan Atkinson's most popular character, Mr. Bean, hardly spoke any English. Because of this, he had an incredibly wide appeal, even to non-English speakers. But what is less known today is that Rowan Atkinson had some iconic speaking roles as well. Some of his most notorious outings were on the sketch comedy show Not the 9 O'Clock News. Here, Rowan lets the jokes fly. Some are dirty enough to get any modern comedian canceled.
Some of these cases are just plain stupid. Looking at me in a funny way. Walking on the cracks in the paper. Walking in a loud shirt in a built-up area.
There's no doubt that if Rowan Atkinson was an upcoming act today, his career would die before it even took off. Jokes that were considered hilarious in the past are barely tolerated these days. Now, PC culture, woke culture, and cancel culture have comedians on a tight leash. So many of them struggle to function in much the same way as their older colleagues did. You see, an increasingly popular movement is pushing back against the idea that you should be able to make jokes about anything or anyone. This movement is pushed aggressively by the woke mob. As we have seen in recent times, the mob isn't just satisfied with mere apologies. Rather, they are only satisfied if the offending comedian never gets to work again. Heck, sometimes they even call for more extreme punishments like jail time. According to Rowan Atkinson, this is a really dangerous movement for comedians working today, mainly because what can be considered as offensive varies widely from place to place and time to time. As more and more comedians are noting, the woke mob doesn't take context into account when choosing to get offended. Rather, they move like a pack of wolves that only want to draw blood. It doesn't matter if the joke made sense to the audience at the moment. The only thing that matters to them is if you say something that's off limits.
We do not think that language or behavior that is merely insulting should ever be criminalized in this way. The clear problem with the outlawing of insult is that too many things can be interpreted as such.
It's well known that the woke mob has run rampant over Hollywood for several years. However, their efforts have intensified lately. Sure, Rowan Atkinson, who has already made his fortune, could have continued to keep his mouth shut and ignore their rampage. But because of how much he cares about comedy as an art form, he feels compelled to speak out. Ironically, many people confuse Rowan Atkinson for his signature character, Mr. Bean. To them, he's merely playing himself. Since Mr. Bean comes across like a child in an adult's body, these people think the same thing about Rowan Atkinson. So, imagine their surprise when he started speaking out very intelligently against woke culture. In witnessing the rise of a scary new kind of establishment in comedy, Rowan Atkinson has decided to drop the dumb act at last. Though he stood up for free speech in the past, he has recently escalated his efforts against cancel culture and woke culture. In an interview with the Irish Times, Rowan stated that in a proper free society, you should be allowed to make jokes about absolutely anything. Of course, his comments did not go down well with those within the woke mob. Even though he has been pressured to rescind his statement, Rowan is proving harder to take down than many other comedians who have been bullied. His piercing intellect is one that the woke mob didn't plan on encountering.
In a recent interview you gave with the Irish Times, you said, comedy's job is to offend, and it seems nowadays people are very careful about what they joke about. Do you worry about where comedy is going?
It's a cyclical thing. One minute, certain jokes or certain attitudes and outlooks are just out of fashion. And in the end, the whole point of a joke is to entertain people. And if people are not entertained, then you haven't, fulfilled your brief.
For one thing, although Rowan doesn't agree with it, he intimately understands why cancel culture exists. He understands that times change, and so must comedy. However, it is not grounds for intolerance. Rowan believes that no one should have to lose their jobs for making a joke, much less get arrested. And since what is considered a joke is highly variable, this crazy culture could take so many innocent people victim. Years ago, one of Rowan Atkinson's jokes took jabs at such intolerance. But little did he imagine that crazy phenomenon would soon become reality.
My concerns are less for myself and more for those more vulnerable because of their lower profile. Like the man arrested in Oxford for calling a police horse gay. Or the teenager arrested for calling the Church of Scientology a cult. Or the cafe owner arrested for displaying passages from the Bible on a TV screen.
You see, the woke mob has no real pushback against this argument, especially when you consider the real-life cases already. Sure, a rich and powerful comedian may be able to survive a bad joke or two, but what happens when the victims are ordinary people with no real money or power? Rowan Atkinson isn't being a mere reactionary when he criticizes woke culture. Rather, he realizes that it may soon balloon out of control and attack the very things it claims to defend.
The clear problem with the outlawing of insult is that too many things can be interpreted as such. Criticism is easily construed as insult by certain parties. Ridicule easily construed as insult. Sarcasm, unfavorable comparison, merely stating an alternative point of view to the orthodoxy can be interpreted as insult. And because so many things can be interpreted as insult, it is hardly surprising that so many things have been, as the examples I talked about earlier show.
Rowan has been incredibly critical of how social media feeds into woke culture. Even though he's one of the most famous actors on the planet, he himself has little to no social media presence. But this doesn't mean he's completely ignorant of how the woke mob uses platforms like Facebook and X to take down people they don't like. As a matter of fact, he compared social media takedowns to mobs roaming the streets looking for someone to burn.
I tend to keep myself to myself a lot. I'm not on social media in any shape or form. I prefer to keep all my activities of a personal level, personal and private, just because I find it much more relaxing. I find the whole concept of social media just not
keeping up with it,
sort of
right?
unrelaxing. Yeah. It feels like an unrelaxing thing, so I don't do it.
Even though he stays off social media, Atkinson is keenly aware of how modern algorithms are programmed to feed on rage and drive up engagement. This, he argues, creates a simplistic and binary view of society. He goes on to say that in a healthy society, everyone should be exposed to a wide range of opinions. If this isn't the case, then he's quite frightened of the future. It's very easy to see the truth of Atkinson's comments. In fact, the moment they broke out, various accounts on X tried very hard to attack their merit. Some claim that since Rowan Atkinson was a comedian, his opinion didn't count for much. Others didn't even bother to create arguments with such mediocre logic. By reacting to buzzy headlines rather than actual comments, these people ended up proving his point completely. The algorithm turned them into a mindless mob filled only with rage.
Although the law under discussion has been on the statute book for over 25 years, it is indicative of a culture that has taken hold of the programs of successive governments, that with the reasonable and well-intentioned ambition to contain obnoxious elements in society, has created a society of an extraordinarily authoritarian and controlling nature. That is what you might call the new intolerance, a new but intense desire to gag uncomfortable voices of dissent.
Rowan has gone on to make an even more important point. Woke culture as it stands has permeated government institutions in a really sinister way. If it isn't put into check now, it could lead to full-blown authoritarianism. Though this prediction seems quite alarming, it's hard to deny the signs and symptoms. With Rowan Atkinson revealing himself to be quite an intelligent man, the woke mob has had a very difficult time dismissing him with their usual takedowns. His comments, which have come as a surprise to many, have inspired all sorts of responses. These responses have come from both the right and the left, and true to their character, both groups are trying to distort Rowan's comments into something else entirely. But then, on the other hand, there's a very interesting thing happening. Rowan Atkinson's comments seem to be getting through to the average person. People who just need a laugh or tired of having to tiptoe around every single thing. To the woke mob's dismay, Rowan Atkinson, in all his simplicity, was the perfect person to sound a warning against their culture.
I think we should all be able to take a joke rather than just get offended by it.
Yeah.
Even if it is aimed at us or our
You could
groups or
take
whatever.
offence, and some people do, at everything.
Yeah.
And frankly, that's boring.
Yeah.
When did we get so uptight as a
I
society?
don't know. It's got worse over the last 2 or 3 years. You can't say anything anymore.
Since getting him to shut up isn't working, the woke mob is trying other strategies. You see, Rowan Atkinson has been trying to reboot some of his old shows, such as Blackadder. But even before production gets underway, many are threatening to withhold their support. The idea here is that if he loses his audience, he will lose his importance. Unfortunately for the woke mob, this hasn't shut Rowan Atkinson up one bit. His motivation has always been to protect the little guy, rather than look out for his own skin. This being the case, he feels he has a strong moral imperative to continue to speak out against cancel culture. As such, in trying to cancel a guy who doesn't care about being canceled, the woke mob has an interesting and remarkably difficult challenge. Do you think they will succeed, or do you think Rowan's logical and heartfelt message will get through to the average person?
For me, the best way to increase society's resistance to insulting or offensive speech is to allow a lot more of it. We need to build our immunity to taking offense. Our priority should be to deal with the message, not the messenger.
Rowan Atkinson is far from the only significant individual in Hollywood to sound the warning alarm against woke culture. Recently, powerful figures like Jerry Seinfeld and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson are pushing back against the woke mob in their own unique ways. To check out how each of them is making a stand, check out our videos on them here.